Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another video. Hope you're all doing well, keeping safe on this Friday. Today I'm going to be talking about Project Restart with the Premier League and giving my thoughts on it. Dries Mertens coming to Chelsea in the summer and Tammy Abraham's reported new contract. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit that like button because it helps out the videos as well. So let's get into the Premier League plans to restart pretty soon. The Telegraph are reporting this pretty extensively. It seems to be a pretty serious thing. Things are moving quite quickly on this. So before I give my opinions, let's read through some of the details and the proposals and how they also relate to Chelsea. A proposed timetable has been circulated among clubs working on the basis that lockdown measures will be eased. Limited training to restart May the 11th with full training on May the 18th. The league then would be restarted on June the 8th. It works on the basis that the next government announcement on lockdown a week today, May the 7th, eases the measures currently in place. From then, the proposed plan is to test players for COVID-19 over the following weekend, May 9th and 10th, with a view to training in small groups for the following Monday, May the 11th, which would then give clubs 3 weeks to prepare their players for the return to competitive games. Matt Law was as well reporting on how this affects Chelsea, with Chelsea telling players to fly back to UK to prepare to start training. Chelsea have informed their players who had travelled abroad during the coronavirus crisis to be back at the club by Sunday as Premier League clubs work towards a gradual return to training. Willian was given special dispensation to go back to his native Brazil to be with his wife and children, while it is understood Pedro, Marcos Alonso and Kepa returned to Spain, and Emerson and Christian Pulisic have been overseas. And so yeah, those are the details. And I have to say, about a month ago, or probably even maybe a little bit more than that, considering losing track of time during this lockdown, I made videos talking about how I want the season to be completed, and really my position on that hasn't changed. I'd love to see the Premier League season completed. I think we all would. I think just in terms of fairness, in terms of sporting integrity, in terms of the long thing of there not being this massive asterisk over this season, and we look back at it in years to come and say, oh, this team got there because of that. You know, it wasn't really a fair way to decide things. Unfortunately, we're not living in usual times. We're living in times that are uncertain, that are unsafe, are scary at points. And I just personally feel morally, when I'm looking at these proposals and I'm hearing things like how COVID, if a player tests positive for COVID, that will be regarded as like an injury, so a muscle strain basically. And I just think that's ridiculous. I think we're getting into a stage now where maybe profit is going ahead of health and safety of players. When you've got players like Sergio Aguero and Glenn Murray, big names in the Premier League, coming out and saying they don't feel safe about returning. Players in general don't feel safe for their families, potentially the virus spreading more. In the UK, we're still in lockdown. The numbers, unfortunately, aren't falling. Sometimes they're rising, and it's still worrying time. And it just feels, to me, very premature and in some cases irresponsible to rush back into the Premier League. Yes, these leagues, for financial reasons, football has to recover at some point. Football has to restart at some point. There are clubs' survival depending on it, of course. And business and the economy, of course, needs to come into consideration with this. You can't just never play football again. But at the same time, I think there's a growing feeling among football fans I speak to and discuss with who are worried about this, who feel it's profit over safety, who feel it's a rush back to football, and the consequences could be severe. Because for me, a player going back in and we get a spread of cases of positive tests, you could be back in lockdown. It could get worse. Henry Winter, the journalist who I have a lot of respect for, said this and tweeted this earlier this week, and I pretty much echo what he says. He put it in such perfect words. I'll read it to you now. Premier League cannot rush back. Sensible for clubs to plan. Understandable for them to want to complete season, but only when scientists and medical experts decree it safe. Project Restart is fraught with danger. Far bigger priorities elsewhere. Football is not a special case. And it's so true. You know, when you hear about the amount of testing that's going to need to be done to make this a realistic proposal, and I've heard, you know, quotes and suggestions from medical experts about how big of an obstacle this is, it just sounds ridiculous. It really does. And I think that the realism of this, I think, needs to be taken into account, not only morally as well. But, you know, for me, something where we're watching football. We want football back because it's a massive part of our lives. You know, it's great for, you know, personally for me making this channel if we have news to talk about. and games to review. But at the same time, if it's this sort of zombified, sort of cobbled together thing where players are having to wear masks, and it's just, to me, it's illogical, and I just don't think football can live in this bubble, isolated world that's different from all of us in lockdown, trying to prevent the spreading of this virus. Those are my opinions. I'd love to see football back. I want to see Chelsea back playing football. We all do, all of our clubs. We want to see our clubs back on the pitch because football gives us so much joy. It's a great escapism in our lives, but not at the cost of safety, and not at the cost morally of the Premier League doing something that could be very stupid, that could endanger lives, and could, in the long term actually do a bigger detriment, instead of waiting a little bit longer for them when it's safer to come back. I don't expect there to be full crowds. I expect fully, maybe even for the rest of this year, we could be seeing sport behind closed doors, but only when it's safe to do that behind closed doors. Next, I want to touch on a couple of transfer stories before we wrap up the video. Firstly, Dries Mertens, the striker from Napoli. There's been so much talk about Mertens to Chelsea for a number of months now, and it's no surprise to me, really. Out of all the links and all the targets we speak about, whether that's Dembele, Martinez, Werner, I feel like Mertens is probably the one you can hang your hat on and say, actually, there is proof that this is a serious thing. There is proof in the past that Chelsea want this player and are interested in this player. We know that way back from January, Chelsea trying to secure Mertens on deadline day for a bigger fee. And Demarcio, of course, very reliable journalist in regards to transfers, giving some quotes about Mertens coming to Chelsea. So I'll read them to you now. In January, they offered 10 million despite his contract ending in June, but Napoli said no because they wanted him to break the club's record of goals. Now his contract is ending, and in this moment he is not renewing with Napoli. The deal with Napoli is in a difficult way, and I know Chelsea want him again. They are talking to his representatives. Frank Lampard has spoken to the player, and they are pushing forward to convince Mertens to accept their offer. I've spoken a lot about Mertens and my preference for him to be a Chelsea player. I think it's a really realistic option for Chelsea, especially in what is going to be likely a very challenging transfer window post-pandemic, or even during the pandemic, whenever it takes place. And trying to sign players for big fees doesn't look like it's going to be that feasible in truth. So trying to get those players to improve your squad that Chelsea need in key areas, I think you're looking at a player here who I think could be that answer. And I think when I look at some of the stats of Mertens, just to dig a little bit deeper on his season this year, we know how good of a goal scorer he is, but just looking at this season in isolation, 12 goals this season for Napoli, and that is divided equally, 6 in the league and 6 in the Champions League. So not a massive haul, but in terms of goals altogether, he'd just be behind Tammy Abraham in regards to our strikers this year. Of course, it's a little bit unfair on Olivier Giroud because he hasn't played a lot of games, and even in the games he has played, I think that his goal scoring record isn't that bad actually. But what you're looking at here is, I think, a striker that almost guarantees you goals, guarantees you a level of experience. I think that Champions League now for me is so good. I think it's one of those players that you're going to get that I think on European nights, if Chelsea do qualify for the Champions League, I think it can really give you something. If Tammy's struggling, I think he'd be happy to compete with Mertens. I think a player who could step into the first team. And I think you've got 3 players there. We heard about Olivier Giroud's apparently contract extension that Chelsea want to get done. It hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but let's hope that is legitimate and it gets confirmed soon, because I think you'd have a variety of options there for Lampard. I think you'd have Tammy, you'd have Mertens, you'd have Giroud. I think 3 different options for Lampard to choose from, and that's what I like personally as a striker. And I think all 3 players who can prove they can score goals, which I think makes it a good deal for Chelsea, and maybe the only striker you can get this summer. Yes, I know the concern that maybe in a couple of years you'd have to sell Mertens, especially Giroud. We'd have to probably sign even 2 strikers if you let Michy go. But at the same time, I think you just need to be realistic about the current situation. Let's get Mertens in. This is a player with bags of experience. If he accepts our offer, what a good deal this is. Bring in this player. He can add experience. He can add more depth and potentially be a good first team player for Chelsea as well. So please let me know your opinions on Mertens. Do you think this deal is realistic? And do you think it can happen? Let me know in the comments below. And lastly, another striker in Tammy Abraham, our current top goal scorer. In his contract talks, I spoke a long time ago, it feels like now, about his contract talks. They've stalled obviously in recent weeks, of course, the pandemic and all of the transfer talks that are probably going on very much have been stalled, of course, for obvious reasons. But Nicola Shara, the journalist, tweeting that Chelsea are in advanced talks with Tammy Abraham for a new long-term contract until 2025. Blues have offered him a wage of 8 million, that's euros a year. I think this is really positive, and just in context of where this is coming from, where the news is coming from, Nicolo Shara was the guy who tweeted about Olivier Giroud's contract, I think a couple of weeks. I remember mentioning on a video even before the likes of Matt Law and Nazar Kinsella and those guys have picked up on it. He does have a good record in terms of reporting stories, so I wouldn't just rubbish this. And I think this would be a massive deal for Chelsea. I think getting his contract over the line, I think securing Tammy to a new long-term deal, I think is brilliant. Tammy himself has rubbished the talks of 180 grand a week before. He's done that on his own Instagram, I believe, when all of that was going on, and he got a lot of criticism at the time. Let's hope this is legitimate. Let's hope this catches fire and Tammy does sign that new contract in the coming weeks. So please let me know your opinions on Tammy's contract. Do you think he deserves this contract? What do you think is going to happen? Please let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch it. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.